Am I on or what?
You're ready to go.
Yeah. Well, my first trip to Chicago was in late December of 1937. And I was in Northern California. And back in them days, nobody thought of riding planes or buses or trains. If you had any money, you saved it. You didn't go wasting it on trains or buses. And I've always wanted to come and see my mother, because my mother left her family and I always missed her. So I started out, in them days I used to be what they call a little hobo. I was a young 17-year-old hobo. And I went and I caught my first train, freight train that is. And I wound up in Ogden, Utah one evening, and I wanted to catch a train going east. So this train was all made up and ready to go, and I was ready to get on it. And I got on it and it started moving. I didn't worry about it, because in them days, all these trains were fruit trains, you know, trains with fruit trains. They had reefers, what they call reefers on them. And we would open up a reefer and climb down in there, and it would be like a little room down there. This train started to move and started to highball. Highballing means it started to really pick up speed. As this train was moving, I was on top of the top. You have to ride the very top of the train, and I go to open up a reefer, and it's frozen tight. Could not open it. Well, I didn't worry about it too much. I figured I'd just pick on another reefer. So I'm walking across the top of that train, get to another reefer, and that was froze tight. I could not open them reefers. And this train, as it moved, had to go to maybe 2 or 3 tunnels, long tunnels. God darn thing went through one tunnel. Of course, my face was getting hit with cold clinkers, they call them. I had clinkers in my face, clinkers in my hair, clinkers everywhere, and it was damn cold. Well, to make a long story short, I had to ride the top of that train, like it or not. I rode it from Ogden, Utah to Rock Springs, Wyoming, and I seen it wasn't going to stop. It just sort of slowed down, and I had no choice. I figured I had to jump off, so I jumped off. I jumped off and fell over and rolled all over and everything, and the rocks and everything else. And I got up and I walked into town. And in them days in Rock Springs, Wyoming, they had gambling. I went into it was like a tavern, a restaurant tavern, the whole bit. And there's tables, guys playing poker, gambling. I had money. I had enough money if I wanted to eat. Stuff. At that time, that was a lot of money. I had around $60, $70. So I went in this restaurant and I sat down. I had a hot bowl of soup. And some guy was sitting next to me. He says, are you going through town? I says, yeah. He said, how'd you like to work? Well, work was really something back in the 30s. I says, I love it. I'll go to work. He says, you ever work in a coal mine? I says, no. He says, if you want a job, you're on. So I says, I'll be there in the morning. And he told me where to meet him and who to ask for, and I had a job to report to in the morning. Happened to be some other guy was listening to us, talking. So when that guy left, this other fellow stepped up and he said, I heard you guys talking. He says, are you going to go to work for him? I says, yeah. He said, I'm going to tell you something. All my family are coal miners. He says, there's more accidents in them goddamn coal mines than there is in war. He says, every one of my brothers has been all kinds of accidents. They have limbs missing and everything else. He said, I'll tell you what, buddy, if I were you, he says, I wouldn't take that job. He said, it's dangerous down in them coal mines. He says, and if I know him, he's going to put you in the worst kind of work. In short, he scared the hell out of me. And I figured, well, according to what he's telling me, I don't want that job. So I decided, well, I don't think I'm going to be a coal miner. So anyway, the next day I just picked up and picked the next train up going east, and I shook every inch of the way. And I was in a reefer. This time I got into a reefer. I lay down there and just slept and shook every inch of the way. I didn't know where I was at. I was down in that reefer, just trying to keep warm, all cuddled up in a little corner trying to sleep. I was just laying there. All of a sudden the guy came and he shined a light down there and he says, "Hey buddy, you better get out of there." He said, "We're about to drop a load of ice down there." But I was lucky that the guy even was doing his job. Shine his light down there, he's supposed to check them out. If there's any bodies down there, time to get out. So I came on out of there, and just like I said, sure enough, the thing was sitting right under a chute, an ice chute. I was about to drop a load of ice into that darn reefer. Anyway, I made another train out of Omaha, going toward Chicago. And I rode the goddamn train until it hit Chicago. I don't know where I was at, but I evidently was at right where I live now, somewhere around the Proviso railroad yards. The reason I know that that's where I was at, because I remember coming out, and I walked down, which now I know the street is Lake Street, and I know now there's Lake in Manheim. I really don't know how far I walked, but there was a streetcar. They had an old streetcar, the Lake Street streetcar. I think it came all the way out to Manheim. I'm sure that's where I caught it, going into the city. So I got onto the goddamn streetcar and I told the guy where I wanted to go in Chicago to meet my mother. My mother at that time lived on Ohio Street between LaSalle and Wells. Well, I wouldn't know where that's at, but he told me, well, you get off on Clark Street and you transfer on Clark Street going north and get off on Ohio, and then you're right close to your mother's there. So that's what I did. And I got off on Ohio and I walked right over to where my mother lived. And I knocked on the door, and of course she didn't recognize me. I was black, blue, green, purple, clinkers in my hair. But one thing I did have is I had a good pair of logging boots with spikes on them. So I got in, she made me take all my clothes off so I could take a bath and everything. And she set the boots like outside to let them air out a little bit. And just that quick, they were gone. So somebody put the snatch on them real quick. So they had to go out, I don't know what they did, a second-hand store or a third-hand store or something, and got me a pair of shoes that were too big, too wide, and ugly, but it didn't matter. I got my shoes, put them on, and I was lucky that she fixed me up with a job. I started out as a big-time hotel worker at the LaSalle Hotel.
And you tell us about what you said really made you really feel so sad, almost ready to cry.
Well, I mean, when I first came into Chicago, in comparison to California, it looked like what I, in my mind, would believe would be the medieval ages or something. And they had cobblestone streets were made out of cobblestones. Just to look at Chicago in them days was so ugly. In them days they didn't pick up the garbage or none. The streets were full of big heaps of garbage all over the place. Rats all over the place. Every building in the city of Chicago burned coal. They were all ugly, black. In them days there was nothing to see a guy pulling a wagon with his body, like if he was a horse or something. And I seen a guy pulling his wagon, and I couldn't believe it. I thought this is the Middle Ages or something. And everything was so ugly and everything. Anyway, I wound up crying. I couldn't believe that I was living in such a dark, ugly place. And I cried, my mother, in front of my mother, and she tried to console me. And she says, look, you're gonna like this town. Gee, the people here are the best people in the world. She said, just give it a chance, and you'll see in a while he's gonna grow in you. So To make a long story short, the following year my mother and my sister went back to California and I stayed. So that 40 years later, 50 years later, I find myself here in Chicago, married to a nice little girl. We had 8 nice little kids, and I wouldn't leave this place for any damn thing. I don't think I'd leave it if they had cobblestone streets and all that garbage on the streets again. I love this town.